And to be fair to the person involved, who's just doing her job, what chance has she got, even if she wanted to, of putting this event in context, having missed the first 3.5 hours and missing probably most of what's to come after this section. Anyway, let's have a recap. This is who we are. We are infinite awareness having an experience. The idea of the conspiracy is to make us identify with the experience. Boom, little me, I have no power. I am all limited. I am just someone who has to follow others. And to manipulate the way we decode reality to fit the ability of the few to control the many by keeping the many in a fraction of who they really are, by identifying with name, with job, with family and income bracket instead of the true nature of infinite self, and to hijack the way we decode reality through the five senses to impose a very different one, to give us the idea that we must follow, we have no power. Someone else must tell us what to think, what to do. And it's control of perception. Like I said earlier, if you control someone's perception, you control their actions, which come from perceptions. And that's the idea. And all these things, interestingly, all those news organizations, what are they doing? They're telling people what to think. And the other thing is that when you, especially as we go through the section after this one, all the different expressions of this conspiracy, everything from banking scams to vaccines to fake human-caused global warming, stuff in additives in food, fake terrorist attacks so that you can change society by justifying change. The idea that all this is being orchestrated by men and women in dark suits or whatever, sitting around a table, it takes on the bounds of ludicrousness. Do these exist? Of course they do. But they are the outer rim of the rabbit hole. And when you go beyond them, deeper into the manipulation, you go through them into the advisors. The people that we think are in power, that's only for public consumption. They're here today, gone tomorrow people in all the areas of institutions and politics, and another bunch will come along tomorrow, but the same force will be controlling them as well. That's the common theme, that's the cement. And you hit the advisors one step back. You go deeper in the rabbit hole, and you go into these really exclusive secret societies, which are way back out of the public domain, and yet they are fundamentally influencing and impacting on what happens in the public domain. So when you've got someone like Obama, he is announcing legislation, he's signing executive orders and death lists for bloody drone missiles in Pakistan, etc. But he ain't the one who's deciding all this. He's the one that's the point that brings it into reality through legislative change. And so behind all these apparently unconnected areas like banks and biotech cartels and NATO and the World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, the media and all this stuff at ownership level is this same force in the background. And indeed, you know, to a certain extent, this was acknowledged by the Swiss Institute of Technology in Zurich when they did this study on the connections between transnational corporations. And they found that these ones that are really red, these very, very few, have so many connections to the others that in effect that's one unit, which is what I've been saying for bloody years, that behind the apparent independence of these corporations, they're actually controlled and connected into the same group. And, you know, you've got these green lines connecting these transnational corporations, but around this group, there's so many connections, it's just one blob of green. And when you take the next step and you realize that the same network of families are actually controlling all these apparently unconnected transnational corporations, suddenly you can see that it's possible to push the world through all these different aspects of society in a common direction. So we have this thing, we call it globalization. What is globalization? It is the centralization of power in every area of our lives. When there's a few and you want to control the many, you have to centralize decision-making. The more diversity of decision-making there is, the more power obviously is diverted away from the center. The more you centralize, the fewer have control of more and more and more. So this is why we've seen this process of so-called globalization, which is what? It is centralizing power into fewer and fewer hands, so fewer and fewer people are having a bigger say and impact on more and more people. This is the idea. It's the only way you can do it. And like I think I said earlier, the more you centralize power, the more power you have at the center to centralize even quicker. That's why this process of centralization has got faster and faster. And as you can see, as we saw in the Olympics, the power of the corporations. The British public put in like 9 billion into the Olympics, and the corporations together put in about $1 billion, and yet they got everything. So much so that little people in their businesses or homes were being threatened with with the law if they just put some of the major symbols of the Olympics or words, in a display. I was on the Isle of Wight. I just went out of interest, took a few pictures when the flame came through. I want to see what happened. This little town on the Isle of Wight, East Cowes, you would never know the Olympic flame was coming through. There was nothing. Why? Because they were all terrified of being sued by the corporations and those in government representing the corporations that had hijacked the Olympics. So it doesn't matter who is the president or prime minister, because the same force is in control. What force is that? And if you look at these underground bases, they call them DUMBs, deep underground military bases, they're all over the world. The level of security clearance to go deep into these bases and know what's going on is way above anybody political leader. They haven't got a clue what's going on in here. So they get elected and they have he's a prime minister, he's got power, oh, someone else has come in. And while all that's going on, someone's running these bloody things without the people in political power, apparent power, having a clue about it. If we find who is running these things, then we're getting very close to who's actually running the direction of human society. So behind it all is a force. The question is, what is it? So this is where we enter the twilight zone. But it's a twilight zone, again, everything is a point of observation. A twilight zone to a mainstream journalist will be perfectly bloody logical to someone who's done 50 years or so, or 25 years, or how many years it is of research into something. This is an important point about perception. One of the greatest ways that humanity is controlled is by the suppression of the sense of the possible. Once you put a wall on the sense of the possible, gotcha! Because anything that comes in, say the lie, if the sense of the possible is not fluid but rigid, it will have no alternative to the lie. I'll give you an example. If the mind is so rigid about possibility that it cannot perceive the fact that you can mind manipulate someone to either go shooting people in a crazed shooting, or be in the wrong place at the wrong time to be blamed for it when someone else has actually done it, then when the government comes out, whatever it is, and gives you the version of Dunblane, or gives you a version of the Colorado shooting in the theater and the shooting in the Sikh temple in Wisconsin, then you have no alternative to the lie, because you can't perceive the possibility of anything else. But if you've got an open mind and an inquiring mind and a much wider sense of the possible, then you can look at the lie from another perspective and say, well, maybe this is what happened. So controlling the sense of the possible, because if you're doing things out here and you've got the sense of the possible here, then when people like me say, this is what's going on, that goes, you're bloody mad, that's not possible, that can't be going on. And the biggest problem is that, and it's not every one of them, by the way. I was talking to one the other day who was very kind of intelligent, involved in all this. But this, in general, is my experience after 25 years of the perception of the possible of a mainstream bloody journalist. And that's why people who speak the greater truth and have done throughout the period of the media have invariably been ridiculed and dismissed because that cannot perceive that the possibility that it can be true. And control of history is also a massive part of this. George Orwell talked in 1984 about basically who controls the past controls the future, who controls the present controls the past, in the sense of if you can give a fake version of how we got here, you are going to give people a big distorted fix on where they are. So history is a real target to distort, to give a distorted version of what's happening now. So let's go through history and let's go in the twilight zone, but from my perspective, perfectly logical from my research. Some time ago, probably a very long time ago, this reality, the part that we're experiencing, what we call the world, the earth, was hijacked. And it was hijacked through entities that operate outside of human sight. Now, as we talked in the first 2.5 hours, visible light, which is the only frequency range that humans can perceive in the conscious mind, is tiny. Anything that operates outside of that we can't see. But it can, if it's close enough in frequency terms, interact with this reality. And the world that is described in ancient accounts all over the world, it's a real common theme, that preceded this hijack, was in many ways similar to that portrayed in the Avatar movie. It was a world where human consciousness was much more expanded. It understood the connections between everything. It understood that at the energetic, electromagnetic level, that you could communicate with plants, you could communicate with animals, you could communicate with apparently inanimate objects, which are only inanimate on the holographic level to our perception. And there was this sense of oneness, this sense of connectiveness, this sense of understanding that we are just a point of attention within a greater whole. And it was a heart society, going on from what I said earlier. They rather interacted with reality from the heart center rather than the gut, which is where most people in our society today do. In other words, we were coming from this heart vortex area. Now, as I talked about, this is an access point through the illusion into the greater whole. And so when you're coming from a heart connection and a heart perception of society, it is dramatically different and creates a dramatically different society to the one we have now. But then came what I call the schism, a massive distortion in the information waveform construct of this reality. And as this distortion happened, there was a distortion in, as I talked about earlier again, the electromagnetic forces that hold the planets and planetary bodies in some kind of stable orbit, and a lot of these planets went walkabout. The solar system we see today is not how it was in the relatively recent past. This is a book called The Saturn Myth by a researcher called David Talbot. It's probably the best book on ancient symbolism that I've ever come across. It's absolutely first-class research. Came out some years ago now. And from his massive, detailed research over many, many years of ancient accounts and descriptions and symbols, he found all these common themes relating to the fact that what we today call Saturn was not where it is now and was not what it is now in terms of the rings and what have you, but was much, much closer to the Earth, to the point that it was in terms of, because it's not a planet, Saturn, it's a dwarf star, so is Jupiter. And it was the prime source of light as the solar system was before this great distortion, this great cataclysm. And looking from the Earth, you saw Venus, and in the middle of that you saw Mars. And here's another, mock-up of the view of this from the Earth. Therefore, Saturn, as it would, became absolutely the center of focus of Earth's society before all this happened. Now, people like Immanuel Velikovsky in the 50s and 60s, he was massively ridiculed for coming out with a series of books pointing out that, in his view and his research, there was massive cataclysmic events in the solar system, and the planets and planetary bodies aren't now where they once were not that long ago. Of course, he was ridiculed, of course, he was dismissed, but he was a fantastic pioneer for not detailed truth in everything that he said. How can you do that when you're trying to uncover something that doesn't want to be uncovered? But it was a fantastic trailblazing theme that he had, which has been taken up by people like David Talbot and Wallace Thornhill. Wallace Thornhill is involved very, very strongly with the electric universe research, as I talked about earlier, and he adds his physics and electronics background to David Talbot's ancient symbolism and accounts background. Saturn, which I say didn't look like that in those days, and Jupiter was certainly involved in these cataclysms. And the effect on the Earth is one of the great universal themes in every ancient culture. Of course, we have the classic coming through the Bible of the great flood and Noah and what have you, but that is just a rewrite of more ancient texts in Mesopotamia, and it's the same theme all over the world, a fantastic geological and cataclysmic events that basically brought the society that was there then to an end. That's Avatar society that I was talking about. And when you look at it, you look at some of the great earth upheavals that we've had, things like the tsunami in Japan and great earthquakes. Now, they're devastating. I mean, the tsunami was unbelievable in Japan, and also the one earlier that was massively destructive. But at least there was the ability of people unaffected to come and help. When you have a global cataclysm like the one all these ancient accounts describe, then there ain't no one coming, because everyone's in the same situation. And if that happened today, very soon, first of all, what we call civilization will be over. Electricity, gone. Everything to do with electricity, gone. Oil, anything to do with it, gone. It would immediately become a primitive society from the perspective of today. And soon, the knowledge of the more advanced society that was destroyed would be lost, and it would only be passed over in myths and stuff like that. And of course, it has been. The stories about great continents, which people call Atlantis and Mu or Lemuria, in the Pacific and the Atlantic, crashing under the waves in this great cataclysm. And under the sea around the world are certainly some extraordinary buildings and cities that were once above the surface of the water. Now, as I mentioned in the first half, the base construct of this universe is waveform information. So any distortion at that level, and this is where the whole thing was created from, this massive cataclysmic event, will play through to the holographic as great distortions that we will see as great geological and weather events. And it was at this point that the solar system became eventually what it is now. And a lot of researchers into this area of the cataclysm look at the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter and say, well, their view, they may well be right, that that's the remnant of some planet or planets that operated in that area before the great cataclysm. So when it happened, the crazies moved in. This force that I'm talking about, that I say, and many of the ancient texts say, were behind the creation of this cataclysm. Not only that, because the mind also works in this waveform level, any distortion at that level will distort human perception, will distort the human mind. And we went from, when I say we, I mean humanity, went from a connected society, an open, aware, expanded consciousness society, into the one that eventually became the controlled society, and even more controlled society that we see today. And these entities were behind it. And the heart interaction also was a victim of this great cataclysmic happening. Because what happened, not least because of the distortion, but also because of the impact of these entities, we moved from being a heart-centered, heart-perception society into the gut. I mean, today, when I say the gut, I mean the emotion. We interact with society today and events today through emotion overwhelmingly. More and more, what does your heart say has become, what does your gut tell you? And we're reacting. We're not thinking, we're not feeling, we're reacting emotionally. And that has massive benefits for the manipulating forces I'll come to. And so the more that we dropped into this gut-based, emotion-reacting society, the more we got pulled out of that heart coherence I talked about earlier, which brings the heart electromagnetic field into coherence with the brain and with the other systems to create this connection that takes you, as the Heart Math Institute in America found, into this higher level of consciousness. In other words, boom, it went the other way. And like I say, the Institute of Heart Math talks about when you go from the heart vortex, the heart electromagnetic field, you go out of the bounds of time and space, the illusion, into the greater understanding of self. So this hijack more and more closed that connection down, and we became a five-sense society overwhelmingly, and therefore locked in to this tiny band of frequency we call visible light, and at the expense of the wider perception that this is just part of who we are, not the totality of it. And more, the body-mind level got disconnected from the greater consciousness level, and once that happens, then we're in real trouble. We then start to see this as the only reality, instead of realizing that this is the totality and the infinity of what we are beyond this tiny band of frequencies we call the world. Now, these entities I'm talking about are talked about and mentioned in every ancient society under different names. And these are interesting to me. This is what they're called by some Central American shaman, the flyers, just a name. We have the demons in Christianity. We have the archons, that is the name for these entities of the Gnostic belief and the Gnostic writings from like 2,000 years ago, around that period and later. And the Islamic jinn. Because the way all of these entities or phenomenon are described is precisely the same, in effect. They're different names for the same thing. And the archons, as the Gnostics called them, were said to be made from luminous fire. The jinn, from Islamic and pre-Islamic Arabia, were said to be made of smokeless fire. And when you look at what's said about, they're talking about the same force, the same phenomenon. So what is it? The Gnostics are very interesting. Gnostic coming from a word meaning knowledge. Whenever Gnostic thinkers showed any sign of getting their point across and circulating their knowledge and their beliefs, they were slaughtered. I mean, that is just a constant. The Cathars that were slaughtered in southern France, ending up on the castle of Montségur in 1244, they were Gnostic thinkers. The people that ran the great library of Alexandria with its 500,000 scrolls of ancient knowledge which the Roman Church destroyed, they were Gnostic thinkers. And as a result of this, very little Gnostic writing has made it through what we call history. But then in 1945, a place called Nag Hammadi in Egypt, a sealed jar of Gnostic writings was found hidden. And from that has come a fantastically greater understanding of what the Gnostics were talking about. These were mystics. They went out into other levels of reality. In many ways, we call them shaman today, many of them. This is what they talk about in these writings. They talk about the Lord Archon, or what they call the Demiurge, and the Archons that serve the Demiurge and the Lord Archon, as they call him. And they relate this to the Judeo-Christian Yahweh Jehovah God. They also relate it, in effect, to what people call Satan or the devil as well. They say that these Archons created the physical universe that we see, but not the earth, the sun, or the moon. And it's interesting that those three bodies have tremendous connections geometrically and mathematically, which none of the other planets do. Anyway, Archon means prince, ruler, authorities, and it has the connotation also of being from the beginning, because the Gnostics said that actually from the beginning of this solar system that we see and experience, they have been here because they were actually the creators of it, apart from those bodies I'm talking about. They talk about the Demiurge being a fake god that created the physical material reality that we perceive. And they talk about these entities being inorganic, like cyborgs, like robotic. And these writings are about 1,600 years old, a bit more maybe, and yet they knew that in terms of the relationship between the Earth and the rest of the solar system, the Earth was alive and organic, and the rest of the solar system was basically not alive and inorganic. How did they know that? Because they were able to get out there and were very, very knowledgeable. And that's why they were attacked by that which didn't want that knowledge circulating. This, in effect, is very much the feeling of what they describe as an Archon world, because the Archons have no creativity as humans do, and therefore their world is stark and ugly and uniform. This is another wonderful symbolic picture of an Archon world, an Archon reality. And that's because these writings say they have no, I think the direct translation is no intentionality. I put it another way, no creative imagination. And the writings from best part of 2,000 years ago make it clear that they envy humans who have this creative imagination, this the ability to create. Like I say, they describe the Archons as cyborgs, a robotic race that can imitate but not innovate. They call it, in a translated word, counter-mimicry. Put simply, if you gave them a blank sheet of paper, they would know what to do with it. But you give them a sheet of paper rather with something on it, with something created on it, and they are able to distort it and twist it. But they can mimic and imitate, they cannot create in that sense. Interestingly, they also use the word fantasia. And in that sense, what they're saying is that these Archons, jinn, different names, but I'll use the word Archon as a consistent, have the ability to create fake realities, to distort reality, counter-mimicry, to give people the view or the feeling of a perception that seems real but isn't. Mind parasites, they possess the mind and influence the mind in a negative way, particularly in a negatively emotional way. The one word they say that can absolutely describe the Archons is deception. And also they say that one of their great means of operation, modus operandi, is to invert everything. That's what they're doing, counter-mimicry. They are inverting what is already created so it becomes something else. And it's no accident that one of the great forces that worship these Archons within human society, what we call Satanism, use inversion as part of its symbolism. The inverted cross, the inverted five-pointed star. And so I've used this quote before in talks, and from this archontic perception, it becomes even more relevant. Michael Elner, who said, just look at us. Everything is backwards. Everything is upside down. Doctors destroy health, lawyers destroy justice, universities destroy knowledge, governments destroy freedom, the major media destroy information, and religions destroy spirituality. Everything inverted. This is classic. Politicians, knowingly, some of them, most of them unknowingly, that are promoters and pushers of the archontic agenda, they are famous for bloody lying, inversion of truth. This is a quote from the English writer Noel Coward, who said, quite rightly, it is discouraging to think how many people are shocked by honesty and how few by deceit. Such is the level of deceit in our society. One word to describe the archontic influence: deception. So this force I talked about earlier that operates behind the crazes in politics and banking and business and media ownership and all the other stuff is this archontic force, which takes many expressions, as I'll come to. And this is absolutely, massively significant. The Gnostics talk about something called hell in relation to these archontic manipulators, and hell means, in our translation, simulation of a virtual reality. A reality that appears real to the decoder, but is not actually real. It's a fake reality. And given what I've been talking about for a few years now, the Gnostic texts describe reptilian entities in relation to being an expression of this archontic force, and 1,600 bloody years ago, they described grey entities, and they describe them as being expressions of the archons, and they say these grey entities are like an unformed baby or a fetus with grey skin and dark, unmoving eyes. They were around thousands of years ago. We think they're a modern phenomenon. No, this manipulation has been going on for a fantastic amount of what we call time. So, what can we ridicule? What's the latest thing to ridicule Icke for? Well, right, let's get a list. They must be adding to it by now. He's been talking for a while at that Wembley place. But one of the things they ridicule me for is the idea that reptilian entities are behind this manipulation of human society. And people can deny their existence if they like. I do not give a shit. They exist. This is a Spanish artist called Robert Ilimos. I spoke in Barcelona, was it 2011, something like that? And he was introduced to me because he'd had an experience which he, thought I might be able to explain. He was into none of this stuff, never heard of me, never heard of bloody reptilians or anything. But he had a partner who was Brazilian. So he was in Brazil in 2009, I think it was. Yes, 2009. And he's out on his own, painting the landscape in his own unique kind of way. He's got his easel and stuff, and he's on his own, and he's painting away in this landscape. And he said, then this came down in front of him. Bit of a surprise, I suppose. And he said it was completely closed up apart from this window, and there were two entities in the window. And he said this thing came down and just stayed there for ages. He said, I don't know if I was taken aboard. He said, I have no recollection of it. And of course, he's got his bloody easel in front of him. He starts painting it, this chap. And what he saw at the window were these reptilian-type entities just staring at him, looking at him. And these entities exist. I mean, what he has painted is also described, and indeed painted, by other people all over the world who've had the same basic experience of these entities. And I had to bloody smile that this year, the Daily Mail has been taking the piss out of me over this for ages, like all the other buggers. And they run a perfectly straight story, headlined, "Welcome to our new lizard overlord. Studies suggest alien worlds could be full of super intelligent dinosaurs." But because it's a scientist saying it, it must be bloody true. That Icke, he left school at 15, he can't be right. Oh, bloody hell. Now, what was also interesting about these Gnostic writings is that they clearly were, in many ways, a blueprint for what became a lot of the biblical writings, but they were distorted. A lot of things were removed that were in the Gnostic writings. And one of the things in these texts says, the Lord Archon, demiurge as they call it, come, let us create a man according to our image of God and according to our likeness, that his image may become a light for us. And of course that became a similarly biblical story, but distorted. Even the History Channel has had a series, Ancient Aliens, the series, and one of those programs in that series was about all the ancient descriptions of interbreeding between humans and non-humans to create hybrid bloodlines. And when we talk about interbreeding, because of what we talked about earlier, the nature of reality, it doesn't mean some entity has to have sex with some human, nor does it even mean, it may do, but it doesn't even mean that there has to be some kind of genetic manipulation. There probably was, but it doesn't have to be, because if you can change the information blueprint at this level, then it comes through to the holographic level as a completely genetically different entity. It's just an information change. So all these things are possible. But certainly they all over the ancient world, this is the most famous one, but all over the ancient world, there are descriptions of interbreeding between non-human entities and humans, creating hybrid bloodlines. This is Genesis. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And this is called the genetic disk. It was found in Colombia, which is estimated to be at least 6,000 years old, and on it are depicted human sperm, human female eggs, the birth process, the whole shebang. Fetuses, they knew that far back about all this stuff, because in ancient society there were high levels of awareness, not least because of these entities, but also in the pre-cataclysmic societies, and that got lost when the cataclysms brought an end to that, and people went back to basically a primitive society would actually build up again. And of course, when you talk about the so-called fall of man, it's all connected to this, the fall into a lower state of consciousness, I would suggest, then reptilian snakes seem to be involved in that. And what is also described is the genetic manipulation of the human form. Again, some people have kind of decoded this or expressed this as these entities created humans. Bollocks. No, what they did was change what already existed. It's absolutely in line with what the Gnostics talk about in terms of this archontic force. They changed what already existed, and they manipulated human genetics so we interacted with reality in a completely different way and became much more suppressed in terms of our ability to perceive reality. We no longer were the connected people of before, and we got put in these bubbles of sense of reality, which has held us in servitude ever since. If you have harmony in the waveform level, then that will play through as harmony in the holographic world of the conscious mind. If you have a massive distortion in that level, it will play through as massive distortions in the holographic world of the conscious mind. A world now of war, people dying of hunger in a world of plenty, about me, conflict on all bloody levels. All this came through from this distortion. They're all expressions of this distortion, and it allowed these entities from just outside of human perception, in frequency terms, to manipulate these this reality that we experience as the world. And they are the force, this is absolutely crucial as we go along, these entities, and that which is an expression of these entities, are all worshipped in the end by all the major religions. People might like that who follow one, but all the major religions, I'll come into that as we go along. The secret societies, which are compartmentalized, they, at the highest inner core level, know that what these secret societies are worshipping are these entities, and Satanism, in its own enclosed secrecy, openly worships these entities. and sacrifices people to these entities. This is what sacrifice to the gods is all about in the ancient world. This. And behind the institutions of banking and politics, media, religion, and all of it, are these entities through particular bloodlines that I will talk about in a second, which in the end all come back to the same force. Now, you've got to see a lot of these, because if something is a force operating through all these different areas of society, ancient and modern, then the same themes are going to come through all those different things. And they do, as I'll show very clearly as we go through in this section. Common themes, here's one: worship of the reptile. It's in our face if you look at it. The oldest known, this is mainstream anthropology and stuff, the oldest known focus of religious worship is the serpent or the snake. It goes back at least 70,000 years to the Slido Hills in Botswana, where the San people, also known as the Bushmen, say that the great python with his bag of eggs came and created humanity. There's so much symbolism to do with this stuff around the world. And this is a man called the Reverend Bathurst Dean. Obviously, he was a Christian, and he wrote a book called Worship of the Serpent, came out in 1933, and basically he did a study of worship of the serpent all over the world, and why and where it went. And this was his conclusion. It appears then that no nations were so geographically remote or so religiously discordant, but that one and only one superstitious characteristic was common to all, that the most civilized and the most barbarous bowed down with the same devotion to the same engrossing deity, and that this deity either was or was represented by the same sacred serpent. It appears also that in most, if not all, the civilized countries where the serpent was worshipped, some fable or tradition which involved his history directly or indirectly alluded to the fall of man in paradise in which the serpent was concerned. What follows then, but that the most ancient account respecting the cause and nature of this seduction must be the one from which all the rest are derived, which represent the victorious serpent, victorious over man in a state of innocence and subduing his soul in a state of sin, as he would say as a Christian, into his most abject veneration and adoration of himself. And you find reptilian entities depicted all around the world, like these are found in graves of the Ubaid people, which preceded Sumer in what is now Iraq, Mesopotamia. The Egyptians used to depict their pharaohs in the way of the cobra, with the cobra hood, the cobra belly, the cobra coming out of the third eye. The Druids used to worship a serpent god called Hu, which if you play it through, Hu-Man, it makes sense, symbolically at least. In Asia, they had the Nagas, who were said to be a people who could take either human or reptilian form. You had Kukulkan, who was the serpent-focused god of the Mayan people in Central America. Of course, you've got the dragon all over Asia. You've got folk tales galore about dragons and flying dragons. And you've got the folklore and the fairy tales of princes turning from frogs into princes and stuff like that. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the Paul VI audience hall in the bloody Vatican. There's old Ben. What the bloody hell is that, right? It's supposed to be... It's called the resurrection. It's supposed to be Jesus being resurrected. Bloody changed since I last saw a picture. Not that they know what he looked like anyway. It didn't exist, but there you go. But so here then you have the way that the ancients in Mesopotamia and Babylon and such like, they represented the serpent, not the fish gods rather, with the scales, fish god worship. And the priests of the fish god cult, like the Dagon fish god, etc., they used to wear hats like this that looked like a fish head. And I'm saying, as I've said in my books over the years, these ancient religions came through is the Roman Church and Christianity and other things. They're just the same ancient religions using different names to hide the fact that they're the same ancient religions. So there's the fish god cult of Babylon, and there's the Roman Church. Old Ben. And there's the Archbishop of Canterbury with his fish hat. You know, marrying the royal couple. It's just the same thing coming through the ages. They hide it. I'll have a pound of cod, please, Pope, and some chips. There you go, there's your chips. It'll be, no. Oh, think of the sponsorship potential, Ben. So, this is a great friend of mine, Credo Mutwa. He's in his 90s now, from South Africa. I met him in 1998 when he called me and said, how do you know about the Chitauri? What the hell's the Chitauri? People, the children of the serpent. It's the Zulu ancient lore and legends of the Chitauri, reptilian entities manipulating human affairs. This is one species, because there are many of these reptilian entities, which Credo painted, because he's he's an artist and a great talented man. Interestingly, when you put that next to Robert Ilomis's painting from 2009, that's much older, in a totally different society, the similarities are compelling. And this is the necklace of the mysteries. It's been stolen now, unfortunately, but I've seen it many times before it was. Credo Mutwa had this passed down as in the shamanistic stream. It's mentioned in accounts 500 years old. He reckons it's at least 1,000. And here you have the symbols hanging from, it's not a necklace really, it goes on the shoulder, it's extremely heavy. And the shaman goes around these symbols and tells the story of African history and indeed world history. And on the front is a very non-human entity with in come and get me mode. And here is a human woman. And this, hundreds at least years of old artifact, that symbol is about the interbreeding between the non-human race and humans to create this hybrid bloodline. And there's more symbols on there, which I'll come to later. And I asked him, I said, well, it doesn't look very reptilian. And he told a story that I found around the world in different cultures, that this reptilian force, this Chitauri, as they call them, said, you never depict us as we really look. So some people did, but many people didn't. They just depicted them as completely unhuman, but not like they really looked. Now, this is a big-time important thing in relation to the world that we live in today and what controls it, who controls it. Because the ancient accounts, again, talk, and I've talked to people on the inside in the modern world who've confirmed all this from their perspective, that certain bloodlines were created to specifically represent these entities outside of human society, outside of human frequency range, in the human frequency range of visible light, to be the manipulators in our world of that which is manipulating our world. Because for vibrational and atmospheric reasons, they cannot come into our world except very briefly, or in technology which gives them a manufactured atmosphere, a manufactured reality in which they can come. In other words, they need representatives that are operating with invisible light to manipulate our world. That's what these bloodlines are. And they see DNA as a software program. They know what it is. They know the body's a biological computer. And they want to keep certain information patterns within this DNA because it dictates the behavior of these hybrid bloodlines. And they want to control them as much as they control anyone else. And so to keep this bloodline pure, in other words, to keep the software program intact, these bloodlines, through the ages, known as royal bloodlines, aristocratic bloodlines, have interbred incessantly with each other. Because if they bred outside of this particular hybrid software, it would quickly become diluted and no longer have the information patterns that dictate their behavior, which I'll come to. In fact, I'll come to it now. One of the great traits of these bloodlines is that they have deleted from them the ability for empathy. Empathy is the fail-safe mechanism of human society, or any society. If we have empathy with the consequences for others of our actions, that fundamentally dictates our actions and suppresses the extreme nature of our actions. If you have no ability to empathize with the consequences for others of your actions, there are now no limits. There is nothing you wouldn't do because there is no emotional consequence of doing it. Indeed, you can get off on it, as some of these do. And these, in the modern world, are what those bloodlines look like today. They've come through history, and now they're the ones in the positions of power in banking, business, media ownership, politics, corporate, massive corporate giants around the world in big biotech, big pharma, big food, and all the rest of it. And they are the representatives within visible light of these archontic, I will call them because they take various forms, entities. And they are shapeshifters, or the most extreme of them can be. Not all of them that were on that picture, but the more extreme of them can be. And people say, that Icke is another one on the list. He says people can shapeshift. That's ridiculous. Well, if you're coming from your perspective of reality, that everything is solid, that is bloody ridiculous. But as I talked about in part one, this is not a solid world. It's a holographic world. The solidity is illusory, as quantum physics will confirm. And the shift in shape is not a physical solidity shift. It is a shift in the information waveform information field. So, if there's a shift in the information field at the waveform level, then it will be decoded through the genetic brain decoding system through to a holographic shift. In other words, the shift takes place in the observer's decoding system. 1 minute the person is looking human because that is decoding the human field. Then there's a shift in that field, and another field which is not human will become the dominant one. That decoding system is now decoding the second field. To the observer, there has been a physical shift from human to non-human and back again, but what there's actually been is a shift in the information fields the observer is decoding. And thus, we see people, he's not there by accident either, we see these people here within visible light, and they look human. But if you could see beyond it, deeper into the energy field, you would see something that's anything but human. And these Gnostic writings found at Nag Hammadi talk about the fact that one of the great ways that these archontic entities manipulate human society and human perception is by being mind parasites, by what we call possessing or influencing the human mind to think, perceive, and act in certain negative ways. So, one of the key reasons that these particular bloodlines were created was because if you have genetic compatibility here in the holographic realm, then when you go back to the base construct, the vibrational realm, you have vibrational compatibility, or much greater, and therefore the ability to possess that body-mind and influence it and dictate its perceptions and behavior becomes much more powerful than the general run of the human population, which that genetic compatibility is not as close. Of course, possession is an ancient, as long as history, theme, right up to the present day. Now, talk to a lot of visual psychics around the world. I mean, I've been on this road nearly a quarter of a century. I've had a chance to talk to a few. And they often tell me about seeing ethereal type entities, often reptilian in form, locking into these lower two chakra points and kind of floating around. This is part of the way that they possess. And then I'm reading an article about this visual psychic, a Swiss bloke, who seems to be, very renowned at what he does. And he wasn't talking about any of this stuff. He was just talking about his life and what he experienced and things that he's experienced. And in the middle of this article, he said this, a guy called Anton Steiger. When I see people in business or politics who are particularly trapped by the material world, five senses, for example, I notice that they no longer have any light bodies at all. In many of these people, the point of light at the heart chakra, which is otherwise always present, is no longer visible to me. What do we call these people like bankers? They are heartless. Literally true on an energetic level. Instead, I see something like a layer of shiny tar around them, in which a monstrous being in the shape of a lizard can be distinguished. When such people speak on television, for example, I see a crocodile shape manifesting itself around the person like in a concave mirror. I don't see the light of their throat or forehead chakra. this is the possession, this is the mind parasite nature of these entities that the Gnostics talked about. Now, lots of people send me stuff from around the world because what I talk about, and I got sent this. I'm not saying that this is real, it might be a trick of the light, but it does give a visual feel for the way so many of these people have been described to me. With the eyes changing from a human pupil to a reptilian pupil, and then going back again. I've heard that, I've seen, people have given me endless accounts of full body shifts, shifts of the upper body, and more than anything, shifts of the eyes. The eyes are the window on the soul, or the window to the self beyond the world that we see. And interestingly, I've got a friend who has an associate who was doing research into, I don't agree with it, but he's doing research into iris scanning technology. And this led to him looking through a microscope into, I think it was 2,300 eyes or pairs of eyes. And what he said, he had no idea that my friend was associated with me, probably had no idea I exist. But what he said to my friend was this: of the 2,300 eyes that he scanned, around 4% appeared to be of reptilian type and appearance, and he could not understand what the hell that was all about. And if someone said, what is the percentage of the human population? I'd say 4 or 5%. That is what I'm talking about. That's how few it takes to manipulate the world if you get hold of the institutions that dictate the world. So we're looking at people from a visible light point of view that look human, but beyond that are not. There you go. He doesn't have to shapeshift Murdoch, does he? Bloody hell. A bit like Mick Jagger. He don't have to, does he, really? But there you go. There's one of them. He doesn't look, he looks perfectly human. Oh, there we go. There's another one. There you go. There you go. Ooh, there you go. Been to the ritual, Mom? Have you? What's going on? And the other thing is that these bloodlines, they, like I've just said, they stay inside the network. And so that when you follow them back, you tend to come across some interesting people. We've had Prince Charles in the last few months talking about the royal family's ancestral connection to Vlad the Impaler, one of the most infamous blood-drinking, satanic torturers in human history, who was a member, along with the rest of his family, of something in its simple title called the Order of the Dragon, which goes back into the ancient world, which is an order of these bloodlines. He was from Transylvania, and old Charles has got a place there. Mary of Teck, her grandmother, was connected genetically very closely down the line to his sister, and thus brought that bloodline into the royal family. There you go. They're not what we think they are. That's the point. And because we only see the visible light level, it seems fantastic. I think, one of the great, well, no, I'll rephrase that. The only good thing, from my point of view, of the Diamond Jubilee celebrations was when, at the royal concert, Elton John sang Crocodile Rock to the royal family. I thought that was absolutely frickin' brilliant. And like I say, these bloodlines have no empathy, therefore they have no limits. Pepper bombing cities full of civilians, couldn't give a damn. Starving people to death, putting mercenaries into countries to cause mayhem, as in countries in the Middle and Near East and North Africa, not a problem. What a laugh, no empathy. Another thing is that a lot of people don't realize that one of the fundamentally important influences of human perception and behavior is called the R complex by scientists, or the reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain, when not balanced by other parts of the brain, gives us cold-blooded behavior and territoriality, a desire to control, an obsession with ritualistic behavior. These are so ritualistic, these bloodlines. Everything is ritual to them. And hierarchical structures of power, aggression, might is right, winner takes all. I've just described human society as dictated by the crazies. And all this stuff in the royal family, all this royal protocol, all this ritual is all reptilian brain. And if you have a greater infusion of reptilian genetics, you're going to have a greater extreme of reptilian characteristic traits. I mean, did you see that after the royal wedding when Madam issues another list to update who should bow and curtsy to bloody who? I mean, what a joke. The last I looked, it was the 21st century. Where are we? What's going on? If he falls anymore, he'll fall over. And we call them the British royal family. No, they're not. They're the German, Danish, Greek, Russian, anything else involved royal family. Same with all the others around bloody Europe. Same bloody family. And, oh no, they're only symbolic now and for ceremonial purposes. Bollocks. She talks about my government. Why? Because that is what it is. She talks about my parliament. It's my military, my MI5, my MI6, my courts, my church. All the people in those organizations, including the representatives of the people, have to say a pledge of allegiance, an oath of allegiance to her, not the people. It's a bloody joke. And this idea that it's symbolic, rubbish, rubbish. I mean, when you meet the Prime Minister, whoever it is, are you supposed to bow or curtsy? No, but he is to her. Where's the power here? I mean, what a joke. Look at him. I mean, do you know, I feel sad really because these people, they go off to wars and, you know, put themselves in bloody danger. I don't agree they should because they put other people in bloody danger at all as well, called children and people. But, I mean, what are you... oh, my God. Beam me up, Scotty. It's mad down here. Get me out. I've had enough. And then there's this royal bloody household that we're paying for. Did you know that there's a gold stick and a silver stick on the royal household? At least they have metallic value. That's probably a good thing. There's a groom of the stole. There's a field officer in brigade waiting. He's always walking up and down, looking pissed off, looking at his watch. He'd be a lot better using his time keeping an eye on that groom of the stole before he nicks something else, I think. And they've got a clerk of the closet. And even worse, they've got a deputy clerk of the closet. What do they do? Pull the chain? Is it the royal flush? What are they doing? Hello, mate, what do you do? Oh, I'm a deputy clerk of the closet. No, don't piss about. What do you do? Then they used to have a removing wardrobe. At least they got rid of him. Removing wardrobe. What do? I remove wardrobes, yeah. Do you ever bring them back? Oh, no, bring back wardrobe does that. I mean, oh, bloody hell. We're paying for this. The British royal family, proof that God has a sense of humour. That's my view, anyway. Now, what is the dynamic here with these bloodlines? Well, like I said, they operate with invisible light on behalf of entities that operate outside of visible light. And if you take the analogy of the scientist standing outside the tank, working inside the tank through the gloves with material that's too dangerous to work with, you take the tank to be our reality, the scientists to be these entities, and the gloves to be these bloodlines that allow them to manipulate within this reality. That's the basic dynamic of why they exist and what they're doing. This is Neil Haig's depiction here of the theme. And thus, these entities have their own agenda. And it's not the human agenda for what's best for humans, it's what's best for the agenda of control of humans. And if you take the Trojan horse analogy and you put that on, then you've pretty much got what it is. It's infiltration of human society while appearing not to be infiltrating because everyone looks human, but only with invisible light. Now, here's the journey of these bloodlines. You can pick it up at some point through history. It goes way back. Let's pick it up here. These societies, these more advanced societies, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, China, etc., they started to appear as the first more advanced societies after the cataclysm. What history does is pick up the cradle of civilization in places like Sumer and what have you. That wasn't the cradle of civilization. These societies were when human society had reached a certain point again after recovering from the great cataclysmic events that destroyed the previous society, much more advanced. In this area of the world, Sumer, which is now, of course, Iraq, became Babylon, why there's so much Babylon symbolism in human society today. Egypt, a lot of the bloodlines came from here, but they were seeded all over the world. and they talked about entities interbreeding with humans and creating royal bloodlines and what have you in various tablets found in Iraq, under Iraq in the last century or so. And these bloodlines moved out into Northern Europe. They became the founders of Rome, and they interbred with other bloodlines in Europe, and they became the European royal families and aristocracy. And eventually, through the great British Empire, the French Empire, great only in size, by the way, in my view, and other European empires, they sent these bloodlines all over the world in the great colonial frenzy of taking the planet over. But there's two types of control. One has a finite life, one has an infinite life until it's exposed. The one that has a finite life is when you, like fascism, communism, apartheid, that which is subject to the control can see the controllers. Because eventually, it might take some time, there will be a rebellion against that. The greatest form of control is control you can't see, where they give you a vote every 4 or 5 years, and yet behind the scenes, the same people are in power behind the scenes all the time, no matter who's officially in power in politics. And that's what they did in the colonial system. They apparently withdrew back into their countries and gave independence to the former colonies like the United States and Canada and et cetera around the world. But what they did was left out in those countries the bloodline under different names and the secret society network through which they manipulate the bloodline and its agents into power, and they've gone on covertly controlling those countries ever since. And what they've created is a secret society and bloodline version of a transnational corporation. What happens with a transnational corporation? Take McDonald's, please. Take McDonald's, if you will, as far as you can. But take McDonald's as an example. They have a headquarters in America, and in each country they have subsidiaries. And the subsidiaries carry out the diktats of their headquarters. And thus, if you go into a McDonald's in Russia or Australia or South Africa or wherever, you go into basically the same McDonald's. What they've done with the Bloodline Global Network is they have a headquarters. Funnily enough, America's very, very influential, but the headquarters is in Europe. It's in places like the City of London, Rome, Brussels, Berlin, etc., Paris. And from the center, they have subsidiaries in the different countries. These are subsidiary networks of bloodlines under different names and the secret society network within that country. And that network's brief or job is to impose in their sphere of influence, their country, what is centrally dictated from the headquarters. Thus, as I've traveled around the world, I've seen the same things being introduced in different countries around the same time, often justified by the same excuses. And it even goes further, because the national network has subsidiaries in the towns, cities, and communities. And thus, from the headquarters, they can manipulate down into a local community, if they wish, through this network. And they've created this structure in which they have not just infiltrated, but created the organizations that run and control the direction of the world. I get into some of them. But what the vast, overwhelming majority of researchers into this conspiracy do not see, or do not want to go there, is the fact that there comes a point where this human network goes up into or out into other dimensions of reality, and the dictating force is not human.